What's going on, guys? I'm a regular guy with the Regular Guy Firearms channel. Thanks for watching. Okay, so we're talking about the kneeling position and stuff now, right? As in the last video, we're going to go over advantages and disadvantages to various different types of kneeling positions. Now, in its purest form, the kneeling position exists to make you a little bit smaller, and it also exists to help you take advantage of not super short but not super tall cover. Really, that's all it is. And over time, the position has evolved into ways to support the rifleman itself, or himself, or herself, whoever the hell really is doing it. But it's to construct a position out of the human body so that we can shoot things. Okay. Now, what I'm going to go over first is the classic kneeling position that's taught in military and law enforcement circles all over. Okay, and all it really is we're taking our gun hand, leg, and that's making contact with the ground. We're sitting on the heel of our foot here, and as we sit on the heel of our foot, we're also going to take our support hand arm, and we're going to situate it on the support hand leg. Now, a couple of things to note here and things to avoid when trying to get into this more classic position is that, the elbow is something that we don't want to make contact with really anything. I mean, if we can avoid it, we're going to try, because the elbow is a pretty round object and it'll roll around on stuff. We also want to avoid throwing that on stuff like our thighs or the actual ball and knee itself. Okay. Obviously, because these are more bony, more easily rollable things, and they're not quite as stable. What we then try to use is the forearm and the tricep. Okay, this really depends on your arm length, and this really depends on how scrunched up you end up, because we're going to be a little bit different. But because I'm a 6-foot tall dude and I have fairly long arms, I end up using my tricep for this. So in this sense, all I'm really trying to do is throw my tricep basically on top of the knee without hurting myself. Now, you'll notice that if I kick this knee out, the knee itself, you actually get the kneecap, and that's super mobile as far as just trying to support stuff on it, and it's also fairly bony. So that is a little bit difficult to do as far as setting up a decent position. If we start to pull the leg back, however, you can see how that changes, and especially since where it is now is essentially rolled all the way forward. We can then go ahead and use that to our advantage by throwing our tricep on top of it. Okay, once we have that done, all we really have to do at this point is insert a rifle into it, and we can use this position right here to engage things from about 0 to 300. Not difficult at all. 0 to 300 meters or yards, whichever one you end up having to shoot at. Okay. Now, the traditional position works good, it works pretty well, and it works pretty well for shooting things fairly far away, meaning 0 to 300, but there's a con to it, and you're going to hear me groan and all kinds of stuff like that when I get up here, because if you have bad knees, this is harder to get out of, and because you're sitting on your heel, this is going to start to get uncomfortable, especially on those toes. So getting out of it is a little more difficult, okay? But as far as just a regular rifleman position and all that stuff, it works pretty well. Now, what if all we're trying to do is make ourselves a little bit smaller, or take advantage of cover and stuff like that, and whatever it is that we're shooting at is closer, okay? Instead of getting into this rifleman type kneeling position, what if all we did was just take our standing position and shrink it? That's all it is. Because, like I was saying before in the last video, all we're doing is taking a knee at this point. We're still squared up, we're still dealing with what it is that we have to deal with up close, but all we're doing is we're taking our standing position and we're shrinking it. Okay, and that's really all that is. Now, a couple of notes to make on this particular position is that if we bring our legs straight down, we can find ourselves unbalanced. Like the top portion of our body feels like it's doing this the whole time. So all we would really have to do is take your gun hand knee or your support hand knee. It kind of depends on what it is that you're doing, and cover depends on this as well. But all you would really have to do is just step out with it, meaning the knee scoots out more to give you a little bit wider of a base. Now, what happens if I have to switch shoulders on stuff and I need to use the other side of cover for something? Well, instead of this knee going down, we're using this knee now. Okay, so all we're doing is we're coming straight up, and even if we're in that other position that we were using and we just finished switching hands, we can take that knee and step it out as well. So what it is that you're doing is just creating a wider base, and you're maintaining the upper body control that you had from the standing position in the same way. Now, pro to that is that it's easier to get in and out of, and you can control your descent from high to low. Meaning, if I start to go low and then I see him start to move and the decision is made, I should probably stand back up and move someplace else, it's much easier to do. Okay, there is another method of doing this, and that's just dropping both of your knees straight into the ground, like so, and going and doing what you have to do from there. However, the con to that, although it is quite a bit faster, is that there's no control of the descent at all. The second you make the decision to use both of your knees to slap into the ground, you've made that decision. And also, for those of you who train and use different types of kneeling positions and go into those regularly, it's going to hurt, okay? It's going to start to hurt a lot. You know, my knees kind of suck, and me getting up and down in these different kneeling positions actually does kind of suck, okay? And of course, there's going to be guys that jump in the comments section, and they're going to sit there and be like, oh, well, it doesn't hurt me, and blah, 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 and oh, gee, it must be great to not have any friends. But it is a consideration to make, because there is a difference between getting repetitions in for things that we're training for and hurting ourselves. So if we're training to do popping in and out of the kneeling position, honestly, use knee pads. It'll save your knees, and it'll save you some pain. Now, with the pros and cons of these last two covered, there is a third one that we really need to get into, okay? Let's say that, again, the cover is just a little bit too high, and that dude's far, okay? 300-400 yards far. There is yet another position that we can get into from the competitive world, or the competitive accuracy world, that really does help with this kind of thing. And all it really requires you to do is take basically this foot right here, roll it, and then sit on it. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. Now, when it comes to this kind of stuff, all we're really doing at this point is we're taking our gun hand leg, right? And all we're doing, instead of sitting on the heel, which will throw in a little bit of human error into it, because you will throw some tension into it, and because it is a fairly bony surface as well, you will sway on it just a little bit. A little bit meaning if he's 400, 500, and 600 yards away, it's going to make your life a little bit harder. But if we can't go into the prone, we still have to utilize this. So we just roll our foot over and we end up sitting on it. Basically, you're sitting on the entire foot, okay? And once you have that entire foot sat down on, we now have a couple of questions to ask on, well, what do we do with this knee? Because it's much tighter than it was before. Now, in the competitive world and stuff like that, you pretty much end up having to sink even further into that kneeling position. But what I found is far more useful, because you are lower to the ground as well as anything else, is that instead of trying to sink my elbow into it and maintain my contact points and all of that way, why don't I just use the machine itself? I can take the rifle magazine, set it on the knee, and either support the rest of the rifle with my gun hand, or I can use the magazine well and my forearm on this side and lay it across my thigh. So I set the magazine on the knee, and I bring the rest of the hand in to where now I've got a hand on the rifle and a forearm on a thigh, and there's just another point of contact on the gun and the body and everything else. So everything is just a little bit tighter, and you can shoot just a little bit farther because you're just a little bit more stable. Okay? And simply put, you are just a little bit lower to the ground, and you're just a little bit more stable. That is the pro, is that you can be more stable, and it'll help you shoot a little bit farther away. The con, obviously, is that this is A, more painful, okay? And B, it is much harder and much slower to get out of. Does that make sense? So as far as all of that is concerned, what you really have to sit there and ask yourself is, well, how far away is he, and how is my brain going to figure out what position that I need? Realistically speaking, and I'm being as honest as I can possibly be on this subject, my brain figures this out in a very caveman-esque way, and I'm not even kidding. If the dude is fairly close, and I mean like inside of 75 yards, my brain reads close. So I will drop into a kneeling position this away and just handle him that away, to where I'm not even really making contact with that foot. I'm just a little bit lower, my base is a little bit wider, and I can use that to rotate around and cover or just start shooting because he's just close enough to where I don't have to get into a stapled position, but he's just far enough to where I'd like to get a little bit smaller if I can. Okay? Usually for something that's a little bit greater than a football field, my brain reads kind of far. I'm not even kidding. Like, I'll be dropped into a shoot scenario, quote unquote, cold, and I'll see a piece of steel that is, and you can tell after a while distances just by gauging them in your head. And if it's outside of a football field or a little bit greater, my brain reads kind of far. So I'll snap into a traditional military kneeling position and deal with it that way. Now, if it's far enough away to where it looks or kind of feels like 300-400 plus, my brain reads really far, so I will get into that more compressed kneeling position, set a magazine on a knee, get nice and tight, and honestly, I use the magazine well for this because I can bring my forearm into this thigh, and I'll just tighten up behind it, and that's how that goes. Realistically speaking, I don't know how it is that you guys do it, but I set it up pretty much the same way, to where it's either kind of close, kind of far, really far. I'm not even kidding. But how it is that you figure it out is really going to have to be on you. But once again, if you guys have any questions on this entire installment, this series, this or the last video, go ahead and throw that in the comments section below. Let me know what you guys do for a lot of different things. Okay, I like to know different techniques and all that other stuff for anything that I'm trying to do, because more options, honestly, are better. More options help you solve problems more effectively. Okay, especially if you've done enough training and practice to incorporate those different techniques. But other than that, remember guys, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy. Oh, my knees.